Good evening. I think we'll get started with our second half for tonight. For those who are just joined us, my name is Dr. Doyt L. I'm the director of the planetarium. And it's been exciting having this interdisciplinary series of lectures over the last number of weeks. We're almost at the end. We've got 2 more to go as we're getting very close to the eclipse on April 8th. And so tonight, it's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Christopher Dietz, who is, although he's talking about astronomical things this evening, is actually a musician and on music faculty in composition here at BGSU, but has great love and interest in astronomy and particularly astrophotography. And so we'll be hearing a little bit about his journey into that hobby and some of the amazing pictures that he's been taking of things up in the sky. So thank you. Please welcome Brett.
Thank you, Kate. Thank you all for coming tonight. It is recording. Just want to get this slide to advance. Excuse me just a second here. Hold on, this, I think I got it. There we go. Thank you. The transfer of smartphone sensor technology to other consumer applications has allowed members of the public with an interest in astronomy to be able to capture high-quality images of distant celestial objects with a relatively modest investment of time and money. This presentation tracks these developments through the experience of one local astrophotographer. Me. And here I am doing some astrophotography on my couch, processing a picture of a comet. Now, what's a little bit strange about this and what this boy is laughing about in this picture is, and we'll get back to him later, is that this is not what I do, as Dr. Dellenbush mentioned. This is what I do right here. I am a composer and sometimes conductor, and I teach in the College of Musical Arts, and that has been my life since 5th grade band. So it's been a long way. But I will tell you tonight about how I got going into astronomy and particularly astrophotography. And despite my musical life from my backyard, I've been able to capture some, what I think are some pretty interesting images of objects both in the solar system and very far beyond. And I will get into some details about how I've done that, how my images have improved over the years, and so on and so forth. So a few ground rules for my presentation. Topics on which I am qualified to speak. Music, which we will not discuss tonight. My experience as an astro enthusiast. What I have learned about astro-adjacent subjects as a result of my astro enthusiasm, and advice for fellow enthusiasts. And maybe I'll make some enthusiasts out of some of you, I don't know. Topics on which I am not qualified to speak include actual science, including but not limited to mathematics, engineering, and physics, although we have professionally licensed people on staff here. If you have questions in those areas, I can direct you to them after the show. So part 1, my God, it's full of stars. Dave. Many of you know what that means, and many of you maybe don't know what that means or who Dave is, but you can Google it or search it up, as the kids say these days. Yeah. So this is the Voyager spacecraft. There are actually 2 of them. They used to build things in pairs because they assumed that one would fail. And the Voyager spacecraft was launched the year that I was born. So if you can have a sort of personal affinity and connection to a machine, for me, it is the Voyager spacecraft. Now, in its lifetime, it has accomplished quite a bit. One has traveled 15 billion miles since our birth. And the other has traveled 13 billion miles. And it takes almost a full Earth day to get a signal out to them. They are that far away. So they've accomplished quite a bit, and made it into numerous media, including this book here. This is a book that I had when I was growing up, and it was the very first sort of gateway into astronomy for me. And maybe some of you have a book like this, the first thing that sort of turned you on to a particular subject, and you remember it very well. This is the National Geographic Atlas, Picture Atlas of Our Universe, and you can tell it's an older book from the early 80s because of the way the font sort of flies at you. All right, this is not a retro thing. This is actually how fonts looked in the 1980s. This is a great book. It has a sort of survey of how the solar system formed and how it's organized. You can learn about the individual objects of the solar system, which I did when I was a 5-year-old and loved this. And there's pictures of Apollo there, and it tells some of the origin stories that go along with creation from different cultures. There's some really nice illustrations. Like most astronomy books like this, there's an obligatory section on Galileo and his telescope, and of course a falling apple and a man under a tree named Isaac Newton. And that's okay, because the first time you're learning these things, you have to learn about those things. And they're sort of cliche to us now, but I was very excited about these ideas. Now, also in this book, this is a National Geographic book, there is a section on that sort of speculates, and I think it's sort of tongue-in-cheek way, what aliens on some of the planets in our solar system might be like based on the properties of those particular planets. So for example, on Mars, you might have these bird-like creatures that hide from the wind, and on Europa, which is an ice-covered moon of Jupiter, you might have this speed skating lizard or something like that. So sure, I mean, they're having a little fun with this, but again, as a kid, this was great for your imagination. In that back end of this book, there are some pictures of what we call deep space objects, so objects beyond the solar system. And when I was a kid, I probably didn't pay too much attention to these because I wanted to learn about the planets and the mythology and the ice skating lizards. But coming back and looking at this book now, I realized that some of these images, like this one of the Horsehead Nebula, are objects that I have recently taken pictures of. And it's fun to go back to a book that you knew as a kid and look at the images in it and say, oh, I know those things. I've taken pictures of those things. In fact, I've spent hours and hours moving the mouse around on the screen trying to make it look pretty. So to make that connection over time is kind of a fun thing for a guy like me. So let's fast forward 30 years from when I was actively looking at this book, and I became a musician, went to school, college, got out of college. I got a job at BGSU. I'm working, and now I have a young person in my house, a young son, this fella right here, and his 5th birthday is coming up, and he needs a gift. Part 2, the eagle has landed.
Oh my.
So this is a text that I received from my wife while I was out to dinner for something for work, and I knew what that meant, because it meant that the telescope had arrived. The telescope that was for Max's birthday had arrived. Now my wife had said, for Max's birthday, why don't you, don't just get him a little Fisher-Price dinky plastic telescope that's gonna not really show you much, and you're just gonna throw it on a pile of plastic stuff that we have for the kids. Why don't you get a proper telescope and you can learn to use it, and you can do it together. And I thought that's a great idea, honey. And I sort of ran with that at a +1 or maybe +10 level. I felt like there was license there. So I bought this telescope, and Max and I started looking through it, and I was amazed at what I saw. I had never looked in a telescope. And Max and I got to experience that together for the first time. So he's way ahead of me in his experience with astronomy. But this telescope is great. We took it all over the place on family trips. We took it out in the middle of nowhere so we could get to some dark skies and really see some neat things. I liked it so much, I bought another one a couple years later. And this was a bigger telescope, more capable, bigger mirror, longer focal length. And we took this everywhere on family trips. It took a lot of space in the car. It was getting very tight. And I was dragging the kids along for all these adventures, and they were good sports, but by this point they were sort of like, okay, Dad, we get it. But at home, there was more like a lot of astro enthusiasm in the house. And somebody built a Lego telescope out of my son's Legos, and it wasn't my son. I'll just put that way. And I would take my kids on tours of telescope factories. And when it came time to dress up as a famous person at school, of course, he had to dress up as Galileo and have his little telescope and so on and so forth. So I'm sorry. I apologize for running my children through this indoctrination, but it's mostly harmless. So this is visual astronomy. This is looking at an eyepiece. You know, you're looking at Jupiter, let's say, and the photons are coming off the sun. They're going all the way to Jupiter. They're coming off of Jupiter. They're coming in Earth's atmosphere. They're coming through that telescope into the eyepiece, and they're expiring on your fleshy retina, and the signal goes to your brain. That is visual astronomy. And I learned a lot from visual astronomy. I learned the night sky. The night sky was something that I had basically neglected my whole life. Kate, can we just dim the lights just a little bit more so we can see the screen a little more clearly? Thanks. It is something that I had basically neglected my whole life. There's a black dome above you with some dots, and occasionally a news story. I didn't really know what was where and why, and sometimes the moon is out, and sometimes it looks like a crescent, and sometimes it's a new moon, but there's actually no new moon when there's a new moon. It was very confusing. So once I got into visual astronomy, I had to point a telescope around and find things. I began to learn the night sky, and I started to connect with, like, I felt like the ancient peoples who would be like, oh, Sirius, you know, the dog star is rising and it's time to plant our crops. Like now I'm like, oh, there's Sirius rising over there, you know, and I'm very much in tune with the stars now, much more than I used to be. Not in a sort of metaphysical way, or maybe, I don't know, but I'm very conscious of which way Earth is pointing at any given time. And also the individual constellations, you know, just what's going on near there. For example, the belt stars of Orion. It's one of the most famous asterisms in the sky, these belt stars. They're easy to point out, they're bright, but there's a lot of interesting stuff going on around them or way beyond them. And we'll talk about that later. With visual astronomy, I really came to appreciate remote places because this is where we live, a very light polluted place. And if you really want to see a lot of the sky, especially without some technological assistance, you're going to need to go to some dark sky sites. And thankfully out west, there are a lot of these. And I would go to these sites, and of course they're beautiful. They're places you should go anyway and experience. But we're talking about, you know, getting out of cell phone range and really experiencing, I wouldn't call it loneliness, but a kind of, what did Buzz Aldrin say, magnificent desolation, I think is how he described the moon. So I would scout these places out, set up my telescope, enjoy the evening, and wait for some really dark skies to appear. And sometimes, like this was in southern Utah, this is a little kit fox that came out to kind of watch me set up the telescope. It was very interested in what I was up to. Little things like this would happen. And through this process of going to these dark sky sites, I became very sensitive to just night in general. Again, something I hadn't really thought about. That's the sleeping time, being diurnal creatures that we are. But if you've ever sat in a chair in one place in the wilderness all night long, it will change your life, okay? As long as you're safe. It will change your life. You've never experienced anything quite like it. It's like your whole experience is inverted. Obviously, things are cooling off. It's getting darker. Of course, the sky is getting brighter in these points. There are many sounds that you think they might be familiar, or maybe they are unfamiliar to you, you know, that you were starting to question. Maybe you get nervous. I've since learned that the sounds of two raccoons fighting it sounds like an apocalyptic demon struggle. And it's incredibly loud and scary. But once you realize it's two raccoons, you're like, it's no big deal. So you become acclimated to the night in a certain way. And you really begin to appreciate what a special ecosystem it is. And of course, you have to learn to stay awake all night. I recommend a steady diet of peanut M&Ms and coffee. Well, coffee eventually doesn't work. Also, and you're getting into any hobby, you have to know when to ask for help instead of giving up. And this happened many times. And in fact, 10 years ago, today, I wrote this email to Professor Andrew Layden of BGSU. I said, "Hello, Dr. Layden. I am an assistant professor of music composition here at BGSU. Recently, I bought my first telescope. I do what observing my time, the temperature, and the sky will allow from my driveway. Are you aware of any groups or clubs at BG or in Wood County that meet with some regularity to observe? If you could offer some information, I would greatly appreciate it." And the same day, what service, Dr. Layden replies, "Hi, Chris. It's great to hear there is another astronomy enthusiast in the area. There isn't an astronomy club in BG, but Toledo has a great one. Toledo Astronomical Association. They used to host open houses at the Wood County Park's Beaver Creek Park near Grand Rapids and would surely welcome other telescopes. Hope this helps and happy observing." And I can say, yes, Andy, it did help. I did go check out the Toledo Astronomical Association, which still exists, and I hope you all check it out too, because they do a lot of public outreach events that are open to the public. You don't have to pay, and you can show up if you have a telescope or not, and look through the club members' telescopes, learn how to use your own telescope, learn things about the sky. If there's a comet out like there is now, they might be able to point that out to you and show it to you. They're really great events. I'll give you their website later in the presentation, but I highly recommend that you actually get out and see some stars. And the people in the club are great. It's a really good group. And sometimes they take trips down to the Keys and other star parties and places all over the country. So off of the visual, onto the camera, onto the astrophotography. This is the first camera that I got. It's a very small, it's a webcam basically, for those of you who remember those webcams. There it is. And of course, it has a very small sensor. This is a sort of array of typical sensor sizes. It's down here. The business end of this, of course, the sensor is in here. Okay, and we're going to talk about cameras and sensors a bit, because you really can't talk about photography without talking about the camera, the thing that is capturing the light and helping you make the image. So it's the sort of beating heart of your astrophotography rig. So we'll talk about sensors. This is 2,500 pixels by about 2,000 pixels, and each one of those pixels is 2.2 microns in width. For those of you that need to review, a micron is a micrometer. That is 1/1000th of a millimeter. So that is a very small thing. How small? Well, a bacterium is about between 1 and 10 microns. So you could get 4 of these pixels on the back of a bacteria. Okay, this is incredibly small technology. A red blood cell is about 10 microns. And there's 5 million of them in that little square. But wait, what's a pixel anyway? We should review this. You're probably all familiar with the idea of pixelation. And when an image seems pixelated, it sort of looks like square. Everything is a little square. And that's usually when you're looking at a screen or an image. But from the point of view of the image taker, the photographer, what does a pixel do? So pixels on a sensor detect and count photons, and then convert them into electrical signals. That's a simple definition, and we're going to go with that for the rest of this talk. Another way to think about it would be to think of each individual pixel. Here's a 6x6 grid, but that little camera has 5 million of these little buckets, and each of those buckets is collecting photons as they come in through the telescope. Okay, little light buckets. Now we're going to talk about color cameras. That's the subject for tonight. And color in astrophotography can be applied after you take pictures, but almost all sensors like this are mono. That is, they're black and white. They're ones or zeros. You either have light there or you don't have light there. And in order to present a color image like your phone, there's a little filter set that goes in front of the sensor. Okay, so we want to with our color cameras, we want to be able to see the visual spectrum of light. Remember Roy G. Biv, the rainbow, visual spectrum. This is where our human eyes work best, particularly in the green part of this spectrum. And to turn our mono black and white sensor array into something that's going to differentiate between these colors, we have to assign these pixels to colors, okay? And the way that they do that, like I said, is they put this thing called a Bayer matrix over the sensor, and it will assign certain wavelengths of light, like the red wavelengths of light, to certain pixels, the green to others, and the blue to others. And this filtering, again, assigns, sort of allocates light to different pixels, and it is how we get color images like, well, first of all, again, the telescope is essentially a light funnel. The camera's gonna go there, and this is your color image, okay? And these are some of the first images that I got with my little webcam and Max's telescope. And I was thrilled to get these because I would never have seen something like this in my eyepiece. That picture of Mars right there, while it's not National Geographic worthy, it is, there's a little cloud in there. You can see the dust, you can see the polar caps. I mean, this is from a driveway in Ohio. This is great, you know, and I was thrilled to be able to see this. So I decided, well, we need more cameras. Actually, I was egged on by some of the other members of that Toledo Astronomical Club. And they said, you should try this other type of camera. You might get even more interesting results. So this other type of camera is called a PAL cam. And this is from a older technology used in Europe. And this is typically used for low light situations. In fact, this is almost all old security cameras use this technology, okay? And what you can do with a camera like this, well, first of all, it's tiny, and the sensor is minuscule. It doesn't have very many pixels in it, and the pixels themselves are not so super small. So it's a bit of a step backwards compared to my little webcam, but it can do something that the others can't. It can stack images, okay? And this is very important. So this is a part of a brochure from a security company that talks about image stacking in sort of a threatening way that I thought I would share with you. You'll note that the criminal on the left has a sort of grainy, fuzzy appearance, whereas the criminal on the right is crisp and clear. So that is accomplished by something we call stacking, okay? And where subsequent frames taken by this video camera are sort of compressed together to help alleviate what we call noise. That fuzzy stuff in the picture, we call it noise. He's very determined there. And so with this camera and my little monitor, I would go out and I would get pictures like this. And you might be saying, Chris, this is not a better picture. I hate to tell you. This is worse. I liked Jupiter better. The moon was crisp. You say this is the Omega Nebula, M17. I'll believe you, but fine. You have to take these steps, these little baby steps in any hobby, and keep this in mind, especially in regards to the technology. The camera that I took these pictures with is really not very sensitive, but these objects, like Jupiter, are incredibly bright. In fact, it's 250 times brighter than the object in the image below it, M17, the Omega Nebula. So while it is a fuzzy blob and an orange little blob, and it's kind of hard to distinguish what it is, I would never have been able to see it otherwise. And again, it's like going beyond what my eye could see. Now, later, once I got some better astronomy gear, I came back to the Omega Nebula and I took a picture of it. And this is what it looks like with sort of a proper treatment, okay? And you can see it's not just a fuzzy blob, at least it isn't to me. There's actually a lot of structure in there. You can see some clumps of gas, star forming, different colors. You really get a sense that this is a dynamic part of the universe, many, many light years wide. It's a huge thing. And just that, if you can just tease that with a little bit of technology, like that cheap security cam, you might say, okay, well, what else is out there? What else is out there? This type of astronomy, by the way, is known as EAA, electronically assisted astronomy. And it's very good for people who have eye problems or people who are impatient. And of course, even since I had that little camera, technology has gotten much better, and EAA has come a long way, and you can have beautiful views of deep sky objects now within a few minutes of stacking on modern equipment. So it stacks, it makes images. They're not the greatest images, but it sort of leads you forward. So part 3. Houston, you have a problem. So yeah, Max's birthday present is a Celestron 8SE Go-To telescope, and it cost $1,000. Lucky kid. Like I said, it was kind of a family telescope, but nonetheless, it required some dough. And I purchased it new because I didn't know any better. The second telescope I got, again, larger, more capable. You can see a lot more with it. It's called a 12-inch mirror in the back, and it's a Dobsonian, a kind of Newtonian telescope. It also cost $1,000. That's because I purchased it used. There is a robust resale market for telescope equipment, and there's sites called Astromart, and there's others, but the principal two are Astromart and Cloudy Nights. And the good thing about these sites is they're very specific. It's not like Craigslist. This is kind of a creepy place and you don't know what you're going to get, or Facebook Marketplace, something like that. I mean, these are people who they love astronomy and they know what they're talking about. And these exchanges, of which I've done many, have always gone very well. So if you're interested in getting in to the whole racket here, I would recommend starting with these sites. So a typical astrophotography rig, one that is maybe a little more than beginner level. This is what it's going to run you, minimum. You're going to need a guide scope and a guide camera. That's the little tiny telescope that sort of rides on top of the bigger one. And that helps talk to the mount and tell it where to point. I'm going to explain that process in detail later. But you do need that. For anything longer than 300 millimeter focal length, you're going to need to guide your telescope. Helpful to have a telescope. If you live in Ohio or the Midwest, you're gonna need to make sure you don't get dew on your lenses. So you're gonna need like these little dew heater straps and something to control that. That sets you back. You need a camera controller to tell the camera when to take pictures, how many pictures, how long are the pictures, what's the gain, so on and so forth. You can do that with a laptop, fine. There are these small wireless controllers now that are really easy to use and they're great. If you're in the city like we are, probably gonna need some filters. And again, the mount and the tripod, which is the most expensive part, is the mount, because it's the most important part, and a camera of some kind. For a dedicated astronomy camera, you're going to need, it's going to be about $500. Now, if you already have a DSLR camera, or even an iPhone, which most people do, a smartphone, you can hook it up to a telescope and take really nice pictures. But it's harder to take really, really nice pictures. Let's put it that way. So that's, there's $2,500. So how I got going in this in terms of my initial capital investment was vintage guitars. So I'm a musician, and before I had kids, I would go around and to local used guitar shops and say, oh, look at this Fender from the 70s or the 60s or whatever. And I would buy it up and then sell it on eBay to mostly Europeans who did not have used guitar shops where you could buy Fender guitars and things like that. And I kept doing this, and I started to kind of come out ahead, and this is cool. I could buy more guitars and then more guitars. And so I was guitar rich and cash poor after 10 years. But as I started getting into astronomy, there were some costs involved, and I essentially converted my guitar collection into an astronomy gear collection. Now, my wife is probably chuckling a little bit because I'm definitely in the red, okay, with astronomy. I'm not coming out ahead here. This is a hobby. It's not a business. but it could be worse. So you might want to think about that. And I sort of got fortunate. I bought a lot of stuff before the pandemic. And then for my sort of next round of upgrades, a lot of the prices changed. Now, I was able to sell a lot of that stuff I bought before the pandemic for a much higher price. Of course, I had to buy at a higher price, but if you know what you're looking for, you can do okay. Okay, so we need to get back to some technical aspects of astrophotography here and look at some pretty pictures. So the guide scope and the camera, they guide the mount, and the mount points the telescope. It's expensive and it's crucial. Here's another mount. This one is very heavy. It's about 40 pounds. It's got 35 pounds of counterweights on it. It's got to be balanced right. It's gangly. And I really hate moving it around, but it's necessary that it be heavy and robust like this. And to sort of talk about this, I'm going to use this room as a model. Okay, so bear with me. This room, this dome, simulates the sky. I hope we can agree on that. The ancient Sumerians used a base 60 numerical system that divided the horizon up into 360 degrees. Fun fact. One of those degrees is about the size of 2 full moons in the sky. Or if you hold your finger out at arm's length, that's about 1 degree of arc in the sky also. Or you could say the moon is about the size of an aspirin at arm's length. I guess it depends on your arm. So because the Sumerians did it, I guess we do it too. So we use this 360-degree horizon. And also like them, we subdivide this into 60 subunits. And these we call arc minutes. So each degree has 60 arc minutes. This is useful because if I want to talk about that big crater on the moon there, I don't have to go, it's in degree 187, a little to the right, a little down, a little to the left. I can say it's at this specific location using arc minutes. It kind of helps be with our coordinates, okay? And there's even a further level here, and these are called arc seconds, which are divided by 60 further. Thank you, ancient Sumerians. And we get within 1 degree of arc, we can even get as specific as 3,600 arc seconds. Okay, arc second is very small. How small? Well, this is about 12 meters, this dome, the diameter, okay? So 1 degree of arc in here is about 10 centimeters. That, maybe like that. That's 1 degree, 1/360th of our simulated sky. That means one of those arc minutes is only 1.3 millimeters. That's, well, you wouldn't be able to see it from your seat. It's small. And 1 arc second would be the width of 3 red blood cells. That's how small an arc second is relative to this dome, okay? So it's a tiny, tiny measurement, okay? And that arc second is what we need the telescope to guide on. We need the telescope to keep those arc seconds on the same pixel for a while. This is the Triangulum Galaxy. Again, all the pictures that you see are pictures that I've taken. These are not NASA pictures, unless I say they're a NASA picture. These are all my images. And it happens to be about 1 degree wide in the sky. So let's zoom in and let's find an arc second, okay, in an actual space image. And let's talk about how the guide scope needs to do its job. So here we go. Let's look for a bright object. How about this red star right here? That looks like a good one. Okay, we're starting to see individual pixels here. Yeah, there they are. Okay, and let's get down here. That's the bright part of the star, and there's an arc second. Okay, and if you're really persnickety, you're going to want to guide it half an arc second because, you know, the guy next to you is guiding it 1 arc second. You could guide it half an arc second, you know. So that's very small. The technology to do this, that little guide camera is taking a picture of that star and every second and measuring its movement relative to where it should be. And it sends a command to the mount and says, no, go left, no, go right, no, go left, go right. You know, a tiny, tiny bit, like a tiny amount. It's kind of an amazing, amazing thing. I love that. I wish I understood it, but again, I don't know anything about science, so I'm not responsible for these things. I just think it's incredible. So for this level of specificity, you may ask, well, how long does this thing need to actually point at that pixel in the sky? That seems a little absurd. Well, for an image like this, it's got to go for about 43 hours. It's got to go for a long time. So you can see that not only the precision, but the sort of durability of that technology, it has to be quite robust. And I'll tell you, when it fails in the middle of the night, it just, it's a sick feeling. So the mount is the most important thing in astrophotography. It's maybe surprising because you think a camera, but it's actually the mount. So let's light this candle. Said, I think it was 1961, as someone sat in a puddle of their own urine in Florida in a spacecraft. They were eager to get off the pad. This is the next camera that I bought. And again, this is a tale of cameras. And this is my first proper astronomy camera. This is not a camera that would do you any good at weddings and bar mitzvahs, okay? It is only for taking pictures of the stars. And you can see the specs there. This is a bigger sensor, so you can capture more of the sky within your telescope light funnel. That's called a dedicated astrophotography camera. Not a webcam, it's not a converted security camera. There's nothing wrong with that. You can still do things with those. What these cameras do is they're able to cool the sensor to around 35 degrees Celsius below the ambient temperature, okay? And this is important because anytime you're flowing electrical current into something like a camera or a sensor, it's going to make heat. Of course, heat is infrared light. Those are photons. I've got this very sensitive thing that's collecting photons, and it's going to collect those photons too. So you want the thing that is doing the sensing to be very still, okay? You want it to be very cold, as cold as you can get it. And you get like, there's actually a heater that then takes the frost off the little window that forms from the coldness of this sensor. So it's like one problem begets another, you know. There's a little fan system in there that helps circulate air, and there's something called a thermoelectric cooling system, which helps even further. It's a total power hog, these things, but they do work great. So these are intended for long exposure photos of deep sky, otherwise known as dim objects. So I purchased this on cloudy nights. I think it was about $500 in April 2020. You all remember April 2020. We all had a lot of time on our hands all of a sudden. And astrophotography became actually a really good hobby for that time because you could do it outside, you could be socially distanced, sometimes extremely distanced from the people around you, and you could still be progressing forward and maybe having some hope for humanity at the same time. And with this new camera, I was able to do pictures like this. And for me, again, coming from those sort of orange blobs of my security camera, those little smears and stuff, this was a huge step up. I could see some structure in these deep sky objects. This one's called the fish head. I could see what kind of looks like a fish head if you look at it right. I could see something I always wanted to take a picture of, the Horsehead Nebula. It's got the Flame Nebula, and the Orion Nebula, which is probably the most famous nebula. It's one of the brightest nebulas. You can see it naked eye on a dark sky site. But after maybe 2-3 years of learning and going to this astronomy club and going on, forums and stuff, I traded in that camera for a different one, and I started getting pictures like this of the same objects. And you can see it's, well, in my opinion, it's much improved. There is a lot more information for one there, okay? There is stuff you could just tell. I mean, if you think, that's, yeah, whatever, but you didn't know that all that is there, right? There's a lot there. And things like that. So why are these newer overlaid images better than the previous ones? Okay, well, they're better, again, subjective, they're better to me because they're cleaner. They have less noise, less that fuzz, and then they're brighter, they're more colorful, they're more detailed and defined. So all those things are sort of helping the image quality, in my opinion. This comes about by having more and better data. And by data, I mean just photons. You just got to look at the object with your telescope a lot longer, or the camera does. You need to catch more of that light. And you need to do it with maybe a better, more sensitive camera, a camera that can get a colder sensor or something like that. You'll have better data as a result. You also need to learn about image processing and the skills that go along with that and software. And this is a whole other part of the process we won't talk about tonight, but it's hugely important. You can have a hard drive full of awesome data, but if you don't know what to do with it, you've got a hard drive. So it doesn't do much. So more and better data. You remember this guy. He was breaking into our condo, maybe, and being noise reduced in the process. This is what we do to make better data in astrophotography. So we're going to use this schematic as a way to talk about brightness. So imagine you have signal brightness from something very dim. There's a 1 on the left there somewhere, to something that is quite bright, 25. Okay, that gives you a good range of, maybe in the Orion Nebula. There are really bright things in the Orion Nebula. There are also very dim things in there. But I want to get it all, right? So in order to do that, I'm going to take, maybe I took 4 pictures, okay? And I stacked them up, okay? To reduce noise. I might be able to see the 25 and the 10, but I still don't even know those other things exist. But as I go, 4 exposures, 16 exposures, 54 exposures, 256, 1024, 4096. Well, it's almost like the numbers on the left got brighter, but that is not the case. What happened was, of course, the noise went down, 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 down. And what was there, it's like the noise floor went lower and lower and lower, and what was there revealed itself. And the process by which that happens is through stacking. So the noise in an image is random. It's heat, it's light pollution, it's things that are every single frame you take is going to show up as a different pattern of fuzzy dots on your screen. Okay, that's the noise at the top. That's the noisy bit. But if you took a lot of frames, say 4,000 frames of things that are random on the screen, well, they're going to average out to something that is actually quite smooth. Okay, after a while, if you took the average pixel value of all those pixels through all those frames, some of them will have noise, some won't, and it's going to average out to basically a very low figure. Okay, and that's the benefit of image stacking. Okay, in digital photography. Now, the number 5 in this picture is not random. It is not a random 5. It's actually there. It would be like a star in the sky or whatever it is that is in the same part of the frame every single time, unlike the noise. And that, of course, that signal is going to be just pumping away with each image, and eventually it's going to be revealed very clearly. Okay, so this is essentially how you can use consumer technology and not be a scientist and take pictures that are interesting. So yeah, this took about 43 hours to take this. But one subframe, in other words, one 10-minute subframe, looks like this. So if I went in the backyard, I said, I'm going to take a 10-minute picture. Open the shutter, let her rip, close the shutter, goes over the computer. You look at your screen, you're like, huh? That is extremely disappointing. But of course, this is just one frame. It's mostly noise. Now, the bright things, the stars, they have a lot of signal. So they're going to come through just like that number 25 came through in my schematic. So yeah, I mean, you can see those, but I'm not interested in those. I want the popped balloon of the popped balloon nebula. That's what I'm going for. And that is quite dim. So it's going to take, in this case, it took me 258 subframes, and over 6 nights to do it. So it's a little bit like watching the grass grow sometimes, or fishing, or something like that. It takes patience. As far as improving your skills at processing, there are 2 programs that I typically use to make these images. On the acquisition side, or I should say on the initial processing side, I use something called PixInsight. And PixInsight is Astro-specific software. It uses something called a FITS file. This is for image calibration and stacking, color calibration, and a lot of the noise, some other noise removal algorithms and things like that, and sharpening. And then we go over to the sort of artistic side of things, okay? And many of you are familiar with this icon. This is Photoshop. And in Photoshop, I mean, yes, you can pull a bunch of tricks in Photoshop and, to Photoshop something involves it being fake, but Photoshop is a very useful tool to do things like image contrast or adding a little bit of depth, balancing colors, getting rid of some color noise. It's a different kind of noise, like cropping and just making it look like an artistic image, because astrophotography is an art and a science. They're sort of hand in hand. And just like these two software packages, they sort of complement one another. So let's go on to part 5 and let's wrap things up. Another famous quote by Carl Sagan. And if you are unfamiliar with Carl Sagan, you should search him up, as they say. So what have I learned from astrophotography versus visual astronomy? Well, I learned that the sky is not a two-dimensional dome. In fact, my old book told me this. This is a graphic from that book where you have the Big Dipper, okay, kind of looks like a ladle. But in reality, of course, those stars are not flat. They're all at varying distances from one another and from Earth. And we see them as this asterism called the Big Dipper, okay? Now, I know that, but it still looks flat to me. And of course, these are all moving, the stars are moving relative to one another, and of course, we're moving relative to them. So what was the Big Dipper, or what is the Big Dipper now, will someday be the big hockey stick or whatever, I don't know. It's gonna change. It's changing right now. This is a picture of 2 galaxies, and there you see them nestled in this bed of stars. It's a sort of typical space picture, right? This galaxy on the left here, this is the Bode's galaxy, and it's got around 250 billion stars. That's a lot. You're looking at a lot of stars right there, a lot of suns. And the other one has about 50 billion, so 300 billion suns, okay? And then some other stars, okay? These galaxies are pretty close to each other by universe standards, 130,000 light years, and they're actually sort of interacting with one another gravitationally. But from you, they are 12 million light years away. Okay, that's very far. Okay, it's almost, you really can't wrap your head around it. I mean, the best way to say it is 12 million years ago, the light left these objects and then hit my sensor. Okay, before my species existed, this light left and said, Dietz, I've got your number. And all the way across the universe, they didn't even know I would buy a camera. And then I bought my camera and boom, landed on my sensor. Very fortunate. So what's confusing about these pictures, and to give you the sense of the three-dimensionality of space, is while those galaxies are 12 million light years away from you, all the little dots that make the picture kind of look like a space picture, pretty dot, those are all stars in our galaxy. So they're basically like right up here in your face. And relatively speaking, those galaxies are they're like in Toledo, okay? So the image is completely warped in sense of distance, how you see it. It looks just like a nicely composed space picture, but you really need to see it as seeing out of one galaxy across a huge void, and then seeing another island of stars where maybe they're looking back, I don't know. Another way to think about this is a comet. There's a comet right now that you can see. I took a picture of it about 2 weeks ago. It's freezing. The comet is pretty close. In fact, it's only 13 light minutes away, which is about 1.5 distance from the Earth to the Sun. So it's, again, by astronomical standards, it's quite close. And now those stars in our galaxy, all the stars in the rest of the picture, they're tens and hundreds of light years past the comet. They don't care about the comet. Okay, and the comet doesn't care about them. All this comet cares about is to not be devoured by our sun. That's all it cares about. And it just goes around the sun and it spits off this beautiful tail. So another thing when you look at an astronomy picture, keep in mind is that it's often a composite of many layers. Okay, and people say it's a picture, click. Well, they're not really made that way. So this is something called a dark nebula. It's a sort of area of dust, and there's some other things going on in this picture too, but I really like taking pictures of dust we're made of star stuff. Star stuff. There it is. If you take away the stars, you can really see that dust, that structure very clearly, right? And if you take away some of that color from the bottom, which is what we call emission nebulas, which are glowing at a very specific wavelength, we get a very different picture. And when we isolate this glowing ions of hydrogen and oxygen, we can see that there's a whole nother story here of gases of ionized gases glowing in space, like neon signs. They're out there. And if we just look at the star field itself, we can imagine what might fill it, right? So an astronomy image has a lot of information and a lot of perspectives in it. Something else I learned is that stars, like living things, are being born and dying all the time. It's like the bugs in your grass and the bacteria in your bathtub. It's just born, dying, born all the time, everywhere. It's an incredible process. It is like a living process. This is the Spaghetti Nebula. It is a supernova remnant. So it is what is left over after a star goes kaplooey, goodbye, and a certain type of star. And all that stardust is spreading out into the galaxy. This is a big object. It's about 6 full moons wide across the sky. It's very dim, so you can't see it with your eyes, but it's an impressive object. This is another supernova remnant called the Cygnus Loop. It's in the constellation Cygnus. You can see it in the summertime. Again, you can't see it because it's too dim for your eyes, but it's pretty easy to see with the telescope, these parts of it. And it too is a shock wave that's coming through a section of gas, and it's making it glow. It's got so much energy, this explosion, that it's making gases glow at specific wavelengths. In this case, the blue is oxygen and the red is hydrogen glowing in space. Again, over vast, many, many light years distance. This is a huge object. So while those are blowing up, popping off, stars are being born. And the appropriately named embryo nebula is doing this. And here you see an extremely dusty part of space. My mother would be very disappointed at this very dusty part of space. But if we zoom in on this part, we see these sort of red, fuzzy parts within the dust. It's where stars have started to turn on, so to speak. They've coalesced gravitationally. There's enough there to make a fusion happen. The star turns on, and they're starting to glow through the dust, and we get this kind of red light, okay? So this is a stellar nursery. This is where stars are being born. This is the kind of situation where our sun was born in. And all that dust around them, well, that's where you come from. The Orion Nebula, we've seen this picture. This is a very close and famous star-forming region. And when you look at that middle section, you see a lot of dust, you see bright stars. You can tell it's a very energetic place. In fact, there's so much radiation here, you would just fry if you got anywhere near this thing. These stars are so big and bright and excitable. It's a very impressive thing. So it's good to know that, like, the universe and the sky, that's not a static thing. It's a very dynamic place. And finally, you don't know what you don't know, and what you don't know is infinite. Okay. So, case in point, I was looking at this picture of the Orion Nebula. When I was processing it, spent a lot of time looking at it and kind of making it look pretty and everything. I thought there was an error in this part of the image. It looked like there was a smudge, or like a star was malformed or something. And I was like, what is that? What is that thing? Why is it dark in the middle? Why is it what star is dark in the middle? And it's like, it's got a triangle, huh? So this is what I could resolve with my telescope. So I looked up, star catalog. What is this thing? What's this called? It's a spaceship. No, it's called the Keyhole Nebula. So there's something I didn't know. Now I know. You don't know what you don't know. And I decided I wanted to learn more about this thing. So I went on NASA's website, and of course they've taken a picture of it. So this is a NASA picture, not my picture. So this is a Hubble view of the Keyhole Nebula. Let's zoom in a little bit, and you can see how beautiful and bizarre this object is. Okay, it's just like, it's like a doorway to nothing. It's an amazing thing. And this is how they describe it. This is how the European Space Agency describes it. Astronomers believe that the dark patch in NGC 1999 was what they call Bok globule, sort of dense piece of dust, a dense, cold cloud of gas, molecules, and cosmic dust. However, follow-up observations using a collection of telescopes revealed that the dark patch is actually an empty region of space. The origin of this unexplained rift in the heart of NGC 1999 remains unknown. So it seems like every time I point the camera somewhere, or NASA points a camera somewhere, we can't answer a question. A new question is posed, there's something we can't answer. This is the case with the Hubble Deep Field, and of course what the Webb is doing. You know, there's all these headlines like the universe is twice as old as we thought. Oh wait, no, it's not. And you see this kind of thing happening right now because the data coming out of the Webb telescope is so, it's posing more questions, even more than it's answering. There's just such phenomenal and curious data. And I really like this idea of this unexplained keyhole in the most familiar nebula that we know. So you don't know what you don't know, and what you don't know is infinite. That goes for me as well. Thank you very much. I'll take your questions. Yes.
Method and for that particular software. Is it possible to do so with a regular camera and an unguided tripod, like over multiple nights, you could say point at like one particular star as a reference point? Is that something that can be done manually then so that
Sure. I mean, if you took the same, if you had good clear nights every night, and you took a picture when that object crossed that part of the sky every night, you would still have a collection of images that you could then stack. The benefit of the mount is that you can get all the pictures in one night because it's going to follow that object and keep it in the frame. Now, I think I know what you're getting at here is that, do I have to buy all this stuff to take a space picture? The answer is definitely not. If you have a DSLR, and even with a very short focal length lens, 85mm lens, wide field lens, you can get, you can do very, very short exposures. That's one way to do it. Or you can do get something called a star tracker. And even a really good star tracker is $200. And it essentially is a clock drive that counters the rotation of the Earth, which is what a telescope mount does too. And you can put your DSLR, it'll screw on with the, what is it, 3/8 screw that goes in the bottom, and set it up and roughly get it aligned with Polaris, and then point it at what you want to do, and you'll be able to take beautiful wide field images of the Milky Way and some of the bigger nebula and things like that. So you can do that with really modest investment. If you have.
To add on to that is that particular software is smart enough that if the frame moves from picture to picture, but the star is still there, does it know how to?
Thankfully, yes, because almost inevitably things move in your frame. They don't all that one pixel doesn't always land in the same spot. So there's a process called registration in astrophotography where it's going to take all these star fields and it's going to say, hey, I know where that is. I've been there before, and it lines it up with the next star field and the next star field and the next star field, and eventually you get what you're looking for. Yeah, yeah, and that it's a kind of a beautiful thing when that happens, because that's when you see your stack. You got all those fuzzy frames, like I want to see the stack. I want to see the stack. You register them, you stack them, and then boom, there is your clear image after all that work. After 6 days of work, you get to see your image. Any other questions? Yes, please.
I have two questions. One, how big are your file sizes on some of these images? And two, when you first set up your telescope, what do you do to calibrate it to get it, pointing in the right direction?
Right. Well, the file size depends a lot on the camera and the sensor, how many pixels it is, 5 megapixels. My current camera is 26 megapixels. And once I go through the processing, the final image will be a TIFF file. And that might be as much as a gigabyte, maybe 12,000 pixels by 8,000 pixels. So it's a lot. It requires some processing power. You don't need a supercomputer, but your computer has to kind of just do that thing. You can't be working on other things. It's just going to work hard on that problem. As far as getting your telescope lined up, something called polar alignment, and it is just what it sounds like. For particular types of mounts, what you mostly want to do is find the celestial North Pole, Polaris, as we call it, the North Star, and you want the axis of your telescope to be aligned with that, because the stars are going to rotate around that point, kind of like, imagine that you're inside of a barrel, okay, and there's the stars, and that barrel is sort of rotating like this. Well, Polaris, the North Celestial Pole, is going to be on one end, and the South Celestial Pole, which is near the Southern Cross, is going to be on that end, okay? And that's going to be sort of running through that as an axis, and then that barrel of the sky is going to sort of rotate around. So as long as your telescope is lined up on that axis, you can do these long exposures, and again, with guiding to make adjustments. So yeah, we call it polar alignment. Yeah. Yes, the young lady in the back row there. A light year. What's the definition of a light year? A light year is the distance that light travels in 1 year. So light is fast. It's the fastest thing we know. Nothing is faster. Am I right? Okay, thank you. Nothing is faster. So since it's the fastest thing, it's a very good way for us to measure all things. And if you turned on your flashlight and you waited a year and you say, I wonder who can see my flashlight. Well, you would go out to that point where that light has gone after a year. And that distance would be a light year. So the closest star to Earth, besides our sun, which is 8 light minutes away, is about 4 light years away. So they'd see your flashlight in 4 years. Well, maybe. So, good question, sir. That's a great question. They're there. Yes, space is a very colorful place. Considering your pupil is at best 8 millimeters wide, it's very hard to see them, and the structure of your eye is really not set up for low light situations. It's very hard to see them in the telescope, an optical telescope of visual astronomy. In the camera, of course, you're collecting a lot more data, and you're collecting color data as well. This particular image, for example, is a cloud of gas and dust, and there's a globular cluster in here. This thing down here, a little group of stars called M4, I believe. And there's a bright star on the left called Antares. This is a kind of orangish star, and that orange star is projecting its light onto some dust, and that dust is then orange as a result of that. And some very blue stars in the upper right, and that dust is reflecting that light. So we have these reflection nebulas in here. And then in the bottom part here, there's this sort of pinkish color is an emission nebula. And this is something that is actually glowing. It's not reflecting light. It's actually emitting light, like a neon sign, like I said. And so all those colors are real. I'll admit, in Photoshop, you do kind of crank up the saturation a little bit, right? I mean, you're making a beautiful picture. So when it comes in, yeah, it's not quite as colorful. But I try not to do any tomfoolery in these pictures, and I really want them to be, I want an emotional response to these images, but I want them to be the object that I'm looking at. In another type of imaging called narrowband imaging, oftentimes science people, they will change the colors for a very good reason, and that is to help differentiate which gases are there. And this happens in all science charts and graphs. They change the color just so you can. It's easier to talk about something if they're in primary colors or something like that. But by and large, with these colors, the pictures that I'm taking, that is the color of the object. It's that wavelength. That's a good question and a common one. Yes, please.
You can take much in the way of infrared or ultraviolet pictures?
Not on purpose. Sometimes I get that in my pictures.
Do you have
I don't have,
cameras for
the cameras will go out to that into beyond the visual spectrum, but oftentimes it's adding more noise to my picture than it's helping it. Although that is a whole area of astrophotography that is very interesting beyond the visual spectrum. Yes.
An artist can paint a picture of that image, can't he?
Sure. Yeah. I mean,
And get rich.
I can get rich. A composer can take this and assign pitches to it, data. We can call it's called sonification.
Right.
Is that right, Colin?
That's right.
That's right, Colin. We can assign each of these stars a different note, and we can run a grid across it and say, here's my symphony of Rho Ophiuchus, and
Right.
have a piece of music.
There you go.
It's data. It's ones and zeros. We can do whatever we want with it.
You pick up your guitar.
That's right. I mean, it might inspire you to write a poem, or it might inspire a computer programmer to do what computer programmers do. So that's very, very useful.
Right.
Please.
Yeah, so I'm a 3D printer hobbyist, so I'm kind of familiar and I can empathize with it not working out after 6 days. So I was curious, like, how does it work with a telescope? Do you set it up and you literally leave it there for 6 days, or do you take it in and then bring it back out and recalibrate it for the next day?
It depends on how big the rig is. Like if it's big, I want to leave it as best I can. I cover it up during the day. If it's just one of the smaller, like ones that I have, I can just take it and bring it in. Yes, it needs to be checked on and realigned and calibrated and fussed over. They like to be
Every
fussed
night
over.
you kind of
I mean, it is more or less aligned, but you want to make sure, you know, if it's sitting on my backyard's soil, so one leg might sink a little bit. And of course, if it sinks a little bit there, that means in the picture, it sinks a lot.
That's
so-
when a failure happens.
You can, oh, there's so many failure points. I mean, it can fail 10,000 different ways, but yeah, that's one thing at least you have some control over. You know, is it pointed at the North Star? Is it pointed at Polaris to start? Beyond that, bad cables, bad connections, cosmic rays, all sorts of things happen. Yeah.
And then I have one question. You said that stars are dying and being born all the time. Do you actually see that? Do you ever see it? Like, I think there was a star in the picture there last time, or?
Yes, you can see it. And they happen in distant galaxies quite frequently. They happen in our galaxy every 100 years, 50 years, somewhere along that line. So you often see this news story about the star Betelgeuse. You know, like, oh, Betelgeuse is acting up again. And we get these doomsday predictions. You know, Betelgeuse again. It's going to go supernova. So that's a reasonably close. It's a bright star. It's not so close that it's going to kill you if it goes supernova. But yeah, I mean, when that thing does go, you will see a very impressive object in the night sky. You will see a star dying before your eyes. What I've seen is in a distant galaxy, oh, there's a new dot. But it's amazing that a galaxy that's 20 million light years away, one star has exploded, and it has made the pixels on my little camera very excited. Okay, it's incredible the amount of energy that gets released over huge distances. So when a star goes kaboom like that and dies, it's quite intimate. Now, a star being born, a little more subtle process, because they're usually shrouded in a lot of star-making material, the dust. And so they sort of turn on, and then as they emit an enormous amount of energy, they start to push away that dust. And then we go, look at those. They call them hot young stars. They're often described that way, hot young stars. That's how they come out. So yeah, I'm not sure anyone's seen that exactly, but you have to be pretty old to see that process. Is there another hand over here? Sure, sir. So that schematic that I showed you was using the idea of increasing your exposures by a factor of 4 to show how you would reduce noise if you did that. But you can take 4,000 exposures. That would be an enormous amount of data, and my computer would ignite if I tried to process that. Another way to reduce noise in your pictures is to take longer exposures. So if you can take a 10-minute exposure or a 5-minute exposure as opposed to a 30-second exposure, you're going to get more data. You're going to get more light, and then you won't have to stack as many. There are other issues that come up with that. It's always robbing Peter to pay Paul in this hobby in terms of getting the good data. But yeah, 4,096 images is not required to take a good space picture. You can do it in one if the object is bright enough, like the sun. But if it's a dim object, it's going to take, I usually like to think of, 4, 16, 64. I try to get over 100, depending on what the conditions will allow. And yeah, night to night, sometimes it's cloudy, sometimes it's kind of cloudy. That data is not as good. Sometimes the moon comes out, and the moon is sort of like light pollution for dark sky objects, and deep sky objects, excuse me. Yeah, sir.
Compared to this deep space photography, what will you do differently for the eclipse?
I will do nothing, not on principle, but because I have to work that day. I guess that is on principle. I have to work that day, and I will be over in the stadium for the watch party here at Bowling Green. And during that time, I'm going to be assisting people I'm sort of an astronomy ambassador over there, and I'm also in charge of making sure the music goes right. We've got the marching band, we've got other types of activities going on. I also think, eclipse pictures are awesome, but I know that there's going to be a million of them of this experience. And I've never seen an eclipse before, a total eclipse. And I really just wanted to see it. I just want to see it like as a human on this rock looking up there and seeing it. And I just want to have that experience. It's soon. It's happening soon. It's very soon. Richie, yeah.
What's your next goal with astrophotography? Just one thing.
Well, once we buy the observatory in Nevada, once we move to the desert, I just first the lottery. I want to get better at making the data that I have look good. Processing. It's a real skill, and it's always changing. It's like anything in software; it's changing very fast. I tinker with the actual optics of the scope, and I'd like to get better at that. I don't think I need to buy any new scopes right away. I have 2 telescopes and a camera lens now.
And they're very expensive.
And they can be expensive, yes. So I'm kind of good on that level, but kind of more like Richie's a really great oboe player. It's like, I don't really need a new oboe.
Yeah.
I just need to practice my oboe more. So
like secret nebula somewhere.
Yeah. Yeah, again, I'm an amateur. The astronomers in the room are like, yeah, this is coffee table stuff that you were looking at here. We've seen all this before. You got to go deep for the real stuff. I'm never going to have a 2-meter telescope, in my yard. So, yeah, sorry. Go ahead.
To take a longer exposure, you probably have to have a pretty good tracker.
Yes.
And then my other question was, I forgot my other question.
Oh yeah, and that's what I was talking about with the mount pointing. You really have to track that
really
object very well.
A good mount and a good tracker.
Oh yeah, sure.
Just for people that don't want to spend a whole lot of money to get into the hobby.
Yeah.
There's some automatic telescopes out there now, like Sea Star.
Yes.
It's $500. They'll take pictures like this. You go out there and you do 400 shots. I think it does pretty good tracking.
Mm-hmm.
A little bit of Star true, but
Yeah.
it does a great job. And you really, get into the hobby.
Do you have one?
Yes, I do.
Oh, yeah. A couple of guys from this club have one, and it's a box. You put it on the ground. Beep. Hello. It's talking to you, and it moves around. Says, oh, I'm in Ohio. Oh, look, there's the sky. Oh, I know where that is. And then what do you want to look at? Oh, your Orion Nebula coming right up. Comes right over. starts taking what, 20-second exposures?
And 10, 20, or 30 minutes.
Yeah, and it just goes and goes and goes, stacks the pictures. It's a good example of EAA, electronically assisted astronomy, and the final outcome is pretty good, and the cost is right.
When you first started, were you using film or glass plates or, I mean, you did.
Right.
you
Fortunately,
said you've
no,
been doing this for a
I
long
wasn't.
time.
I've been doing this for 10 years.
Oh, so you've been.
Yeah,
computer-
so I've been in the digital age the whole time. So, before I answer one more question, and it might be,
We've got a question from online.
oh, okay. I want to make sure that, by the way, that's everything that's in that picture. It's a lot of stuff in there, right? I want to make sure I put this up too. This is my Astrobin gallery, this QR code with the little dinosaur in it. Astrobin is essentially Instagram for astrophotography, and you'll find a lot there. I mean, pictures of mine and pictures of, I mean, there's incredible stuff that people are doing. So that's a really great resource. If you're interested in particularly YouTube channels where it's a lot of how to, what should I buy, how do I get started? These are some excellent names to look up. In terms of forums, classifieds, buying used material, reviews of new materials, cloudynights.com is the place to go. It's a sort of catch-all for astronomy. You can find everything there. And then locally, the Toledo Astronomical Association, toledoastro.org. Like I said, we have many public outreach. It's every 2 weeks in the summer and fall, spring, summer, fall, and we're out there. So, if you're ever interested in looking at telescopes, please come. Kate, what was that question?
Yeah, you could bring up the chat, or I'll paraphrase here a little bit. Asking about the photographing the eclipse, and if you have any recommendations on how best to capture the corona or Venus or the comet.
Right.
The eclipse.
Well, I would suggest once the sun is obscured by the moon, you don't need any special filters or anything like that. You have to be careful that you're not exposing before that. Otherwise, you'll damage your stuff. I don't really do solar photography, but I know a little bit about it. You probably want to use a fairly wide field, like a DSLR lens. I'd say maybe 100 millimeters or so is best, because the corona of the sun is going to be quite, I hope, quite large and expansive beyond that. And as far as exposure times, it really depends on the ISO setting of your camera or the gain of your camera. I think you'd have to go to one of these resources online and ask and get those types of numbers. But this is definitely possible with a camera lens. So yeah, you don't need a big fancy telescope and mount to do it. So, yeah. One last one, please.
Using cat back on it. Tell us a little bit about some of the original compositions that are going to be
Oh, sure.
related.
So as part of the watch party, excuse me, we are, if you've ever been to a planetarium show like tonight, you notice there's music, and it has a particular planetarium music quality, okay? And for the Eclipse watch party in the stadium, we wanted to kind of take some of that ambiance of the planetarium and supersize it for the stadium. So I'm in music composition, and we put out a call to our student composers to write pieces in that style, planetarium music, that will be broadcast over the PA system in the stadium as thousands of people gather to look at the sun. And this will be, these compositions, which are all pre-recorded electronic compositions, will be sort of periodically paced throughout the pre-clips, the eclipse, and the declipse, if you want to call it that, as we have that special moment together. There's other music too. There's marching band, like I said. They're doing some space music with the marching band and other things. But for the composition department, it was about doing kind of a big outdoor planetarium and having that kind of sometimes silly 70s goofy planetarium music sound, sometimes very awe-inspiring, sometimes sort of it's quite sort of doom music because there's a lot of legends about a serpent eating the sun and things like this. So the music that the students have written, it covers the gamut, and it's really interesting. So by the way, if you're very interested in this topic of planetarium music, there is a resident expert sitting here, Colin Hochstetler, who also wrote a piece for the stadium. And next to him is Hayden Mesnick, one of our student composers, who is going to have one of his pieces played in the stadium. So I think we should probably stop for time, but thank you very much for your questions and your interest and your attention.
It's actually before, we've got some great classes here, if you want to pick them up on your way out, you're very welcome. Great.
It's like the competition. Yeah, same style. Thanks.
History.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, so the personal history. Thanks for coming.
Sure.